Welcome everybody to this webinar. I'm Colin Preston, Baringa's Global Head of Climate Solutions. I'm joined today by a panel of experts from Baringa and BlackRock to talk about net zero strategy for financial services and investors. We're delighted to bring you this webinar today as part of the New York Climate Week, in a year where this event is more important than ever, given the scale and impact of extreme climate events on the global population this year, and also the significance of the opportunity of COP26 to influence our path forward for the next decades to come. In this webinar, we will share our experience and views on what net zero means for the financial services industry and investor community, and the role that each of us can play in accelerating the global transition to net zero. We'll talk about some of the practical challenges that we face, as well as the opportunities that transition will create, and the significant role our industry has to play enabling and funding these opportunities. Before we kick off the discussion, it'd be great for each of the panel to introduce themselves. Let's start with Anindita.
Thank you, Colin. I'm Anindita Pal, delighted to be here at New York City Climate Week. So I'm a director within Baringa's Financial Services Climate Risk and Strategy practice, and I work with clients across the sector, from banks, insurers to asset managers, on the net zero targets, as well as related climate initiatives.
Fantastic. Thanks, Anindita. And Oliver.
Hi, thanks, Colin. Yeah, Oliver Ricks, partner at Baringa. Really, very excited to be part of the panel today. I lead climate change and energy transition modeling and analytics.
And Chris.
Thanks, Colin. Happy to be here. Chris Weber, I'm the Global Head of Climate and Sustainability Research at BlackRock. And as the name implies, I head up our thought leadership around climate and sustainability.
Brilliant, thank you. And Antonio.
Hi, I'm Antonio Silva. I'm the head of the Aladdin Sustainability Lab. So responsible for the research, for the data, for the technology, for the product that we bring together to clients around sustainability at BlackRock in Aladdin specifically. So working very closely with Chris.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. So let's start the discussion kind of at high level, thinking about a view of the overall net zero challenge for the global economy. Chris, would you kind of be able to give us a view on that?
Yes, absolutely. So it's a big challenge, to say the least. So net zero is essentially an encapsulation of the Paris Agreement's warming goal. And to meet the Paris Agreement, basically what we need to do is reduce our emissions, and we need to reduce those emissions very quickly, about 7% per year annually from now till 2050, hitting net zero, meaning a balance of any remaining emissions with carbon sequestration by mid-century. To put this in context, in 2020, during the global pandemic, our emissions went down by about 6.5%, according to some estimates. So we need to do that every year from now until 2050. Obviously, making that happen is an incredibly large deal. It's a social endeavor of a magnitude kind of never tried before. In their seminal report in 2018 on this topic, the IPCC highlighted these 4 key system transitions, they called them: the energy system, the food system, the transportation system, and the industrial system. These all need to be changed over, very radically, all at once by 2050. Each of these would be an enormous endeavor by itself, and all of them have to happen simultaneously. As such, this transformation is going to create a huge historic investment opportunity. This is going to take a lot of capital investment to make all these changes happen, to the tune of, IEA estimates around $4 trillion a year, starting in 2030. This investment then, of course, has massive macroeconomic ramifications. Putting that much money into the economy, of course, will change the entire structure of the economy. Our own BlackRock Investment Institute estimates that this transition can drive about a 25% cumulative gain in macroeconomic output by 2040, as compared to business as usual. So, and as this massive transition is happening, what we're trying to do at BlackRock is give investors the tools they need to take part and gain in this historic investment opportunity.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. I think that encapsulates the scale of the challenge and the opportunity at an economic level across the globe, the topic of this webinar is really about net zero. What does that really mean for financial services? What's the role of financial services and the investor community in achieving that? And indeed, it'd be great to get your viewpoint on taking that down into those industries.
Yeah, absolutely, Colin. So as Chris very eloquently put, it's a massive challenge. But the good news is that financial services firms have a huge role to play in driving decarbonization across sectors because of the unique way in which they are able to influence sectors through their capital provision. So this is through their lending and investments. And really, from a financial services firm's perspective, it is the share of the emissions of the companies that they finance that matters. That is effectively also known as Scope 3 financed emissions. And that is the biggest contributor to a financial services firm's carbon footprint. So really, when we talk about net zero for a financial institution, we're talking about the challenge in relation to reducing the financed emissions footprint. So then we go into territory of setting appropriate targets. And based on the work that we have done with clients to date in this space, there are a few considerations that we see. The starting point is very much about understanding your current footprint. So this is also known as the baseline. And there are standards in place, and we see PCAF as increasingly the go-to standard for measuring your starting point or baseline emissions. And having done that, then firms would really need to understand the scale of the challenge that we spoke about and really understand the degree to which they need to be supporting that transition. So this is where scenario analysis then becomes a very powerful tool. And really what firms ought to be doing is really looking at benchmark scenarios that are aligned to a 1.5 degree target. IEA have recently released their NZD scenario. There are NGFS 1.5 degree scenarios. And it's really about selecting the right scenario for your organization's portfolio, and then really looking at how your portfolio is likely to evolve over time, all the way through to 2050 and beyond. And that's because the trajectory for a client in the power sector will look very different from a client in the steel sector. There would be regional dimensions too. You have very different implications for emerging markets, for instance. So having considered your starting point and then your projection of what your finance emissions footprint might look like in the future, I think what would be a really important next step to take would be to really then zoom in on what you are able to do at the counterparty level, to really then work with your clients and engage with them based on your clients' current business models, based on their specific sectors and regions, the commitments they may have made already, and really then understand the type of action you ought to be taking to support your clients get to their targets, and ultimately, as a financial services firm, establish what else you would need to do over and above your clients' trajectories to ultimately align your portfolio to net zero. So, target setting it's a hugely important consideration, and it is really important to recognize that it is not about setting a declining target in a linear way to reduce your absolute financed emissions, because I think there's a potential danger of unintended consequences there, because you could achieve a reduction by shrinking exposures to some of your high emitting clients, but that's really not the right way to go about it. That would be potentially very counterproductive and not help the world get to net zero. So it is very much about supporting the transition process and really for firms to be part of that solution and create the right incentives along the way.
Thanks, Anindita. It's really clear from how you described that journey that it's going to be very different for different organizations, different banks, insurers, asset managers, asset owners across the world, depending on the organizations that they lend to, that they insure and that they invest in terms of how they engage and the role of their clients and their counterparties in the transition. Thinking about the this journey, it's clearly going to be challenging. Chris, that was very obvious from your introduction, and Anindita, in terms of how you described the journey for financial services and investors. It's not a simple one. I'd love to move into talk about what are some of these major challenges and what are the tough choices that firms are facing. It'd be great to get a perspective from Oliver and Antonio on that.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. I mean, it is hugely challenging, I think. Maybe starting with the analytical challenge, as Anindita has described, this really requires building an understanding of the fundamentals of their transition, an area that's really quite unfamiliar for many firms that haven't had to do this previously, and doing that not just overall, not just at a global level, but really drilling down sector by sector, understanding what those different pathways look like by region, as Anindita's pointed out. So the shape of the transition in different countries is going to look different. The starting points are different. Resource base is different. The other economic challenges those markets are facing are different. And so that's a really important part of the context. And then even from there down to the firm level. So, within those sectors and those regions, really understanding which firms are transitioning or have the strategies and plans in place to transition, and which are not, and hence bringing those signals into your capital allocation process. And then there's a massive commercial challenge, of course, as well. Net zero, as Chris has well described, it's a radical pathway. It's a radical change to our economic system at pace. It's like nothing we've ever seen before, and that clearly is going to translate to hard commercial decisions for financial organizations that are committing to a net zero aligned pathway. And it also means really having to extract the most out of all the tools available to do this. So clearly there are going to be tough choices on the negative side of that around, potentially having to reduce or withdraw capital from firms that are not transitioning. But equally important, more important, is where does the replacement for that come from? How do you redirect that capital? Clearly, this is not about financial. We want financial services firms who are supporting this transition to grow and commercially succeed, to have more impact, and therefore, the focus has to be on how do they succeed and grow while shifting and going through this reallocation. So finding those businesses that are transitioning, channeling investment potentially in a more dedicated way to support specific transition investments, maybe with ring fencing on the terms of that lending. Looking at tools as well. I know these are controversial, but what's the role, for example, of carbon offsets, both for the system as a whole, in terms of us globally succeeding in net zero, and if we are convinced that that's indeed a positive, then finding the role for those either within counterparty strategies or within the strategies of firms where those can be positive and additional to direct reduction in emissions. So, this implies a huge shift in the commercial way the organization operates, shifting gears for front office, for origination, scaling up new business at pace as this shift happens. Antonio, I think you've probably got some thoughts as well to add to that.
Yeah, and I will take a more broader perspective. So thinking about the agents that interact with the financial system, I think by now it's pretty clear to everybody that yes, the change is massive, and that it has the potential to have a significant impact on assets. Therefore, we that work with asset owners and asset managers have the obligation, obviously, to work with them towards this challenge. Let's start with the regulators. They are definitely working hard in terms of mandating climate stress testing around, providing and setting up the right disclosures and frameworks, both to protect the investors, but also to increase transparency. about where we are and where we're heading. And so you see the stress test that all financial institutions in the UK performed during the summer of this year, and for instance, ECB that is doing the same sustainability analysis and requirements into 2022. But across the world, you see other states like the state of California in the US, or even cities like New York that are increasingly regulating this space. And from the organizations and from the companies themselves, you see also a very good forthcoming in terms of support for TCFD and other kind of disclosures. For the firms that the financial services industry supports, for the firms, as Oliver discussed, there is really tough choices to be done as they are on their journeys and as they are providing these commitments. It is really hard to manage profitably a firm already, but on the uncertain investment environment that we are currently, it's definitely much harder. What are the policies that will going to be adopted, and how these policies will benefit or not the business that I'm in? What are going to be the technology breakthroughs, especially on a time where so much money is being invested on these technologies, and the discovery from one day to the other can significantly change, the competitive landscape and the ecosystem. For how long are the assets that I invested on, being machines or production systems, for for how long they will be productive, or how are clients going to react to a particular set of commitments that my company is doing, or the strategy that I'm setting. So a lot of questions and a lot of hard decisions for the firms to do. The same thing for clients, for consumers like us as economic agents. We will have to do our part, and so understanding what are the business models that we want to support, what are the commitments that we want to encourage, what are the business models that we want to press for change. So a lot's going on also there. And finally, in terms of the governments, everybody knows how stressed the budgets from the different governments are across the world. And so to define effective fiscal policies to support the changes that we have been discussing, it's a high order. And so when we have those stranded public accounts already, making the trade-offs between climate change and sustainability in general, or other things like health, education, retirement, security, and all the other themes that are bubbling up from our society. Those are trade-offs that are going to be quite hard to do too. So a lot of tough choices for many of the participants on this ecosystem and for society at large. Making no choices, I think that it's pretty clear also that making no choices will definitely deliver worse outcomes, as we discussed also before. So the good news, as we will discuss later on, the good news is that with those choices, there are opportunities that everybody will have access to. So looking forward to discuss that part too.
Brilliant, thank you, Antonio. And I guess what's clear from what everybody's saying is there's risk, there's uncertainty, and there are going to be losers through this process. But the most important thing is the scale of the change, the scale of the opportunity, the scale of the requirement for us to transition across all parts of the economy is going to create opportunities far greater for those organizations that embrace this, that embrace the challenge of net zero and support their clients and their customers to do the same. I'd like to just kind of close this first section of this webinar with a question to all of you, which is, if you were giving advice to an organization that maybe hadn't started the journey, a financial services firm or an investor that hasn't started this journey, what would be the key thing that you'd be saying to them?
Yeah, I'm happy to make a start, and I think, Colin, if this doesn't sound too cheesy, I would say make the start and make that start today. You know, the challenge is ambitious, but you know, we are all at the foothills of this journey. Right, the data is far from perfect. The standards are evolving, and could be better aligned. So there's a lot more that we will see in this space over the next few months and years. So yeah, make a start with measuring, and start by working with your clients. Make client engagement a key priority. Understand your clients' risks and opportunities in relation to climate change, and really just kind of work with them as best as possible to support their transition. And I think as you've got measure, you've got measure, you've got a transition. The other component of this is embedding, and that's where you need to think about embedding net zero across your organization, right from your lending and investment strategy to incorporating net zero considerations and metrics into your risk appetite, into your corporate planning processes. And by doing this, firms would be well positioned to take advantage of the huge opportunities that the transition will bring.
Thanks, Anindita. And who's going to go next?
I'm happy to jump in on that. I think that what I would say, Colin, is that you know, as we've talked about in this session, and as we'll talk about in the second video as well, like this is a big analytical challenge. Like there is a lot of work to do to kind of figure out what climate risk and opportunity looks like for your portfolio. The good news is you don't have to do it all at once. Like you, as Anindita was saying, you know, you get started, like you're going to learn a lot. Like for most investors, financial services companies, there's going to be a kind of a logical place to start, whether that's a certain region portfolio, a certain asset class, a certain sector. Get started there. Learn what you can. Everything's going to evolve over time anyway. You're going to learn, you're going to evolve, and then what you learn from getting started, you can apply across the portfolio in the second step.
Yeah, and then maybe a bit of a perspective. I mean, maybe echoing some of the things Anindita said as well. But you know, this is not just a target setting exercise. This is not just a analytical exercise, and it will involve a major shift to the way the strategy of the firm, be that the portfolio process for an asset manager or the lending portfolio for banks. So it really needs to be something that is, you know, the whole organization is buying into. It needs to be top down. The executive, the board, all need to engage in this from the beginning and be a part of that journey.
And I'm happy to conclude on a different level, maybe more from a personal perspective too. The focus on this area of sustainability and targeting net zero. It's a great source for you to build a culture, to reinforce the principles, the purpose, the mission of your institution. And with that, good things follow, like talent. We see it certainly, a strong correlation between talent and a great company purpose, obviously a purpose that is lived through the rankings and through the company. So it is a great strategic move also in this perspective. So as Anindita was saying, no excuse not to start now.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody, and some brilliant perspectives there. To kind of wrap up this first session, we've really seen over the last few years widespread commitments from so many organizations, so many firms in the financial service industry, so many organizations in the investor community have made commitments, but far, far fewer of them have been able at this stage to go on the journey to embedding those in their organizations. That's right from the board level strategy, as Ollie was talking about, right through the whole organization, and the capability and the talent that Antonio was talking about. And yes, it needs to start small in terms of Chris's view, but it's got to go right through the whole organization, and it's got to include that engagement with clients and everything you do on a day-to-day basis. This transition is going to take time, but we need to start now, and we need to move quickly with that. We hope that the insights that we shared today will help people, give them some ideas. It maybe raises some questions that people want to go and investigate further. If people want to get in touch with us, they can do. That's via the hashtag Achieving Net Zero. If you've got any questions for us or want to get in touch with anybody from the panel. Moving on, our second video, which will come up straight after this one, is look at how we go into more detail on the potential for financial service and investors to support and accelerate the transition of the global economy to net zero, and the critical role that data will play in that journey. So we'll be moving away from the net zero strategy of the financial services firm itself to the role of financial services in helping all of its clients, its customers, the global economy to transition to net zero. We hope you'll join us again. Thank you very much.